I think that we will turn to our first story here, and that is the ongoing saga around the U.S.-Mexico border and the attempts by many politicians to demagogue around that. I guess that's my editorial comment on it. But we are very, very happy to be joined here on the show by Todd Miller, who's an author and journalist who covers border issues and is based in Tucson, Arizona. Todd, thank you so much for being back with us here.
Great to be with you again, Eugene and Rania.
Well, I wanted to bring you here. We wanted to bring you here because, of course, we are in a sort of multi-year issue, I guess you could say, but all of the rhetoric around the border, how there's a surge at the border, talking about migrants who are coming, seeking asylum here in the United States and the so-called crisis of the border. But you recently wrote an article, The Real Border Surge, that was pushing back on some of this mainstream framing about how the quote-unquote crisis at the border is portrayed in so many different outlets and by so many different politicians. Talk about that if you could.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to wade through that rhetoric, isn't it? There's a lot of it. They just lay it on thick. So in this article, which was the title was The Real Border Surge, and what I meant by that is that when you look at things, and so what this article was looking at the precise moment when Title 42, which was the pandemic era rapid expulsion policy that was used by the United States so they could rapidly deport people, when that was going to expire in May. And so all that, the rhetoric you were mentioning, Eugene, of all hell and high water was going to happen, or whatever it was. You could look at many different places and hear many different descriptions about what was going to happen. And then because of this rapid expulsion policy being terminated, right, or expired, and what I was looking at, I was at the same exact time, which was a very interesting juxtaposition. I was at an annual conference that was called the Border Security Expo that was taking place in El Paso. And this is a place where the high brass of Department of Homeland Security comes every year. And by high brass, of particularly ICE and Customs and Border Protection and the Border Patrol, along with a whole host of representatives from private industry. So you had nearly 200 companies from different from private industry who were there, who were in conversation with the high brass of DHS, who were trying to sell their products ranging from all kinds of different things, from drones to biometrics to sophisticated camera systems to knives to body armor to all kinds of things. And to watch this all unfold in the same week that Title 42 was expiring, during all of that rhetoric, and watching how it was being narrated from that point of view, from the, I would call the industrial complex point of view, was super illuminating, because I was hearing a narration of making a profit off of what was about to happen, as enforcement wasn't going away, of course, on the border as the rhetoric had it. It was actually ramping up in a different way. And so that's what I looked at. And when you look at what's really happening, when you look at the budgets, when you look at how much money is being spent in different places, one of the things I looked at was the incredible jump of budget for border and immigration enforcement from 2022 to 2023, a $3 billion jump in spending. When you look at that, you see that the real border surge is something else, right? It's a surge of enforcement. It's more of a surge of the industrial complex. It's more of a budgetary surge than a surge of people coming across the border.
Mm. And, just to give people an idea of the amount of money we're talking about here, you say in your piece, $29.8 billion for the Customs and Border Patrol / ICE portion of the Department of Homeland Security budget. And you're talking about a surge, this $3 billion jump above 2022 levels, which is like more than Trump was able to do in a similar amount of time. In fact, you call it Biden's you refer to it as Biden out-Trumping Trump at the border. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean by that? In other words, I mean, obviously this is very bipartisan, but this is happening under a Democrat who was, of course, brought into office talking a lot about how the Trump administration was, caging babies and using the whole issue of the way Trump was being, treating immigrants and rhetorically attacking immigrants as a way to get people to come out and vote. And now you see this massive surge under Biden. And then where is all this money going?
Yeah, I don't know if you happen to catch that. There's an article, or I guess it's a column by the infamous Thomas Friedman.
We love him on the show. We love him on the show, Todd. He's a fan favorite.
Yeah, he's great. So he wrote an article like suggesting or maybe insisting that Biden out-Trump Trump on the border, right? So the whole idea was that Biden should just go all in on what he calls border security. I find that to be a term that isn't really accurate. I would say go all in on border militarization, right? Go all into border enforcement. And then I read, I mentioned, I used that in the piece because he used out Trump. Biden needs to out Trump. And of course, probably like he's been doing throughout his career, Mr. Friedman didn't do the proper homework and didn't see that was already happening, right? That the budgets were just soaring over. So Trump was able to increase the annual budget, like you were mentioning, Rania, like a little bit over 3 billion or close to 3.5 billion over his 4-year term. And Biden did it in 1 year, right? Or this last year. That's to show like how significant this jump was. So the idea that he is definitely going all in, except without the vitriolic rhetoric, right? Without the saying, I'm going to build this wall and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that and we're going to stop people and the ball is going to be like 7,000 miles high and all across the 2,000-mile U.S.-Mexico border. There's not any of that. It's all happening without, I guess I hesitate to say under the water or under the table because it's not, right? Like anyone who lives in the borderlands sees it happening, sees all this kind of investment happening, particularly not necessarily in the wall, but I want to say that the wall is continuing to be constructed. And so that whole thing about we're going to not build one more foot of wall, the 1 more foot of wall has been built underneath under the Biden administration. They're building more wall, actual physical barrier wall in the what they call the gaps that were left by the Trump wall construction. But what we're seeing more of is technology. It's the virtual wall. It's the bringing of the robotic border apparatus. And I can't think of anything more symbolic, more vivid to represent this than the robotic dog, which is this UGV or unmanned ground vehicle that Border Patrol has a couple of them and possibly more. And it looks like a dog. The company is called Ghost Robotics. And they're always at the Border Security Expo. So I talked to the vendor again this year. And they have a big banner and it says, robots that feel the world, right? Robots that feel the world. Well, think about that one, right? And so this kind of dog, right? This dog that an agent can control with a tablet, that can be weaponized, that it has artificial intelligence. And that's another big issue that's going on. AI is becoming a part of all these different technologies. And this is the sort of robotification or technification or digitization or however you want to put it of the border that we are seeing happening in accelerated fashion. And this has been going on over the years. It's not just something that's happened with the Biden administration, but Biden is definitely pressing the accelerator button more and going into this this area of the border and which would include not only robotic dogs and drones and surveillance cameras and all that, but biometrics, right? And building up these databases and using iris recognition and facial recognition technologies. And it's a kind of surveillance that doesn't only impact people crossing the border, it's very much impacting citizens, people that are living in the United States, where the surveillance cameras are looking into people's communities. People are getting their facial recognition photos taken. I think every time somebody enters the United States at this point, or leaves the United States, you might not want to quote me on that exactly, but most people leave the United States and enter the United States, get their picture taken for facial recognition at this point. So those sorts of things are becoming very, very, very pervasive. And those are the trends, I would say, that we're seeing under the Biden administration, and what this budget surge is going to more than anything else.
No, I think that's a critically important point. And I want to pick up on something you mentioned in terms of, border security as a term, because I think that in and of itself says so much. I mean, one, I think it implies that migrants are inherently dangerous. But two, this sort of surge of this quote unquote border security, or as you say, border militarization, it implies that actually works in deterring people from coming into the country. And I mean, I wonder what you think about those two propositions, because it seems like it's such a loaded way to even start the conversation that once you've sort of used the phrase, you've to some degree defined the issue.
Exactly, precisely, right? The issue is defined. So who's going to disagree with border security, the word security, right? And from a Washington perspective, no one is, right? You look at, I remember doing a Google search on Democrats, right, during the Trump years, and finding we are against the wall, but don't get us wrong, we're for border security. There's that like, you never say you're against the sacrosanct border security, but that is it frames the issue in a particular way that is very inaccurate. Like, when you think about what the border is, and border enforcement and border militarization, well, the whole premise of the deterrence strategy, it's a deterrence strategy that's been in place for 3 decades. It's called prevention through deterrence. It's to make crossing the border as dangerous as possible, right? So for people crossing the border, it's definitely not border security. It's border, putting your life in peril. Many people have died crossing the border. For people who live in the borderlands, you talk to people and having to go through checkpoints, people living in communities where to go to the doctor or to school, they have to go through a border patrol checkpoint, or they have border patrol going through their communities, or doing home invasions, or pulling them over, or pulling them out of their cars, or beating them with batons. There was a Autumn Nation, which is just south of where I live in Tucson. In May, there was a man who stepped out of his house about 1 mile from the border, and when Border Patrol arrived to his house, and was shot 38 times by several agents and killed. So the idea of border security is one that is a very dubious at best and highly inaccurate term. Or you have to say border security for who? Is it security? Because it's not security for people crossing the border. It's not security for people who live in the borderlands. What is the security for? And this is where, is it the security to maintain a system of injustice throughout the world, right? Is it like our borders being used as a way to quote unquote solve problems of people leaving places because of many different reasons, including U.S. imperialism, really, including all kinds of different ways that the United States has crossed the borders and inserted itself into places like Mexico and Central America and all throughout the world, right? So what like the term itself, it like obscures what is really happening. It turns problems that United States might have a tremendous amount of responsibility into like those become they disappear, right? The U.S. involvement, like people just arrive to the border in a complete vacuum. You have no idea why people arrived there to begin with, and then we have to defend our sovereignty, you know, that's the kind of rhetoric that's thrown out. Oh, and so it's rhetorical defending of sovereignty, but in reality, is that? And those are the questions I think would be really beneficial for people to ask throughout the United States. And if we could really start to unpack like terms like border security, quote unquote, I think that might be a good place to, you know, really get a much more holistic conversation about what this is and where we could go from here.
Mm-hmm. Well, Todd, really appreciate you at least getting us started in that holistic conversation. I hope everyone is checking out your work on this and any other issue. Todd Miller, author and journalist, covers border issues based in Tucson, Arizona. Fantastic recent article on foreign policy in Focus, The Real Border Surge. Hope everyone reads it. Todd, thanks so much for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you very much.